Friends, today I'm going to tell you two despicable crimes that took place in the name of honor. We're going to start in the state of Georgia in the United States. I'll tell you the story of Sandila Kaval, and then we're going to move on to the case of Rukshana Nars, which took place in the city of Derby, which is in the north of England. I'm going to explain the nuances of these crimes. Both families were of Pakistani descent. I am of Pakistani descent. The theme for today's video is going to be pride, ego, shame. A lot of you have heard me talk about honor killings, so I'm just going to explain this in more detail. Please bear in mind that some of you, of whom may be of South Asian descent, may find what I have to say offensive. Just keep in mind that I am only telling these stories as I see them. And the whole purpose of me as a content creator is to make you see these stories in a context to which you may not have seen before. So if you do end up liking this video, please subscribe. Also note, I do have a third YouTube channel, which is purely for trials and interrogations. If you would like to subscribe, link is in the description. Finally, these cases are so rare that images and video footage was very limited. So most of what you are going to see is stock photos. I do have photos of most of the criminals, but there isn't much. So please keep that in mind, because I know a lot of you like the images and the video footage, to give you a visual image in your head. So we start with Rashid Chowdhury. He immigrated to the United States from Pakistan following the death of his wife. After he remarried, his 4 children, including Kaval, emigrated from Pakistan and began living with him. Now her name is Sandila Kanwal, but the way you pronounce her last name is Kaval. Now upon the insistence of Rashid in 2005, Sandila married her first cousin in order to permit the cousin entry into the United States. So let me explain this. What most families do in South Asia when someone is given some kind of permanent residency in Europe or in America, essentially the first world, then they will do what they can over time to help bring their family in the third world, or in this case South Asia, over to the Western world. I don't know if this is the right term, but you can call them economic migrants if you want. In this context, however, it's a little bit more sinister, because Rashid, the father of Kaval, he wanted her to get married, so whoever this person would be would come over, and then that person can provide for his family back in Pakistan. The problem with this is that you're using your daughter as a pawn, right? Furthermore, the person in question is Sandila Kaval's first cousin. Now, most of you watching me, you're based in the United States and you're based in Britain, essentially in the Western world. So you might think to yourself, first cousin, what the fuck? Well, this is done because it's essentially tribalism. The father, Rashid, knew exactly who the person was that was going to marry his daughter. So he's thinking, well, I'm better off bringing him here. He'll look after my daughter because I know him. He's also going to provide for his family and my family back home, and then eventually a lot of them can come over here. Now, this cousin, he arrived in Georgia. He stayed briefly with Rashid and his family, and then he moved to Chicago without Kaval. During this, Kaval contacted an attorney and she wanted a divorce, and then when her family found out that she wanted her divorce, they essentially locked her up. I mean that metaphorically. So she wasn't allowed to leave her house. She wasn't allowed to remain in contact with most of her friends. Now, Kaval and her father Rashid, they would argue frequently. Kaval in fact contacted a friend and said, please take me to a physician so I can prove to my father that I'm not having any affairs and that I am not pregnant. You see, her father became paranoid, thinking, well, my daughter doesn't want to be with this cousin, and the reason for that is because her mind's been polluted by someone else. Surely she's pregnant. Surely she's having an affair. Surely there's someone else. The problem with Rashid at this juncture of the story is that he looked at everything else as an issue rather than himself. In a telephone call to the friend, Kaval confided that Rashid had found out that she filed for divorce and that she feared her family would take measures against her, including poisoning her food. Now, on July the 6th, 2008, Clayton County Police, they responded to a 911 call to Rashid's residence. One of Govell's brothers told the police that he thought Govell was dead inside the house because his father Rashid told him so. The officer found Rashid sitting on the ground behind a vehicle in the driveway and asked him what happened. Rashid responded that his daughter was dead, and when the officer inquired how she died, Rashid just dropped his head down between his legs. The officer, he then entered the house and he could smell some weird electrical smells of like a burning cord or something of that nature. He then went upstairs and he saw Govell's dead body. The officer, when looking at the body, he saw darkened marks around Govell's neck, and when the officer went back downstairs, he saw a burnt cord inside the garage. Rashid himself appeared to suffer a medical emergency and he was taken to a hospital. Following his release from the hospital, Rashid was transported to the police department where detectives conducted a videotaped interview of him with the aid of an interpreter who was fluent in Urdu and Punjabi. Now, during this interrogation, it was not allowed in court because apparently his Miranda rights were violated. Now, I do speak Urdu and Punjabi, but because this interrogation isn't available, I can't really decipher it. So when this police interview ended, Rashid said, "Let me go speak to my family." And the recording equipment was still going when Rashid was talking to his family. So Rashid, when talking to his family, was speaking in Urdu and Punjabi. Now for those that don't know, Urdu and Punjabi are very similar languages. You could say that Punjabi is the dirtier version of Urdu. It's a bit more of an aggressive language and perfect, if you're trying to curse. So, but you can easily transition from one to the other in the same sentence. And whilst he's talking to his family, he literally admits to taking the life of his daughter because she wanted a divorce. Rashid told his family, "I could not tolerate it, that my daughter confronted me in this way." He went on to describe the act of the murder itself. He said, "There was no noise. Those who want to get things done, do it silently." And in the same conversation, there were multiple times where he justified what he did. He kept saying that she brought dishonor upon me, she brought dishonor upon my family, and that she wanted a divorce from the cousin. It would also bring dishonor, and the word on the street back in Pakistan would be a negative one. He concluded the conversation by saying, "God will protect me, God knows everything." And this last sentence is important. What does he actually mean when he says God will understand? What he's trying to say is that he's already justified it in his head. He's thinking, okay, it doesn't really matter what happens to me now. I know I'm going to go to jail, but he's in a sense absolved himself from any guilt by saying, well, the judge might not understand and you might not understand, but God understands, and he's probably using that as a way to comfort him during this obviously traumatic time. Now, at the preliminary hearing, Detective Mike Christian told a judge that Rashid copped to killing his daughter on July the 6th with a bungee cord because she had filed divorce papers and was having an extramarital affair. Christian said that when they approached the garage, Rashid was actually sitting there smoking a cigarette. Now, Govell herself, she actually worked in Walmart, and her husband's name, this cousin, was Majid Latif, but it was this loveless marriage that she wanted to escape. Rashid went into a murderous rage after apparently growing tired of numerous arguments with his daughter, concerned that their clashing cultural values would reflect poorly on him and his family, said the detective in court. And in May 2011, Rashid was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility of parole. Now, I've spoken about this in previous videos, but the reason why this took place is it's a mentality issue. A lot of the Pakistanis and Indians and Bengalis, subcontinent Asia, when they come to Britain or when they come to America, they bring their culture with them, which is fine. Anyone does that. When Mexicans come and live in America, well, they bring some of their culture with them, right? This is normal. However, I can only speak from the Pakistani mindset, as that's my culture and that's how I was raised. When they bring their culture, they hold on to it. And a lot of the cultural customs in Pakistani society, in Indian society, they also bring to the Western world. Essentially, it's the old saying, you can take the individual out of Pakistan, but you cannot take Pakistan out of the individual. So, this notion of marrying your cousin, right? This notion of, well, the daughter's not going to object to it. She's obviously going to do it. These are all old customs from back home. Now, I've been to Pakistan many times, and it certainly happens a lot less these days. But back then, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, this was just the norm. So, with it being normal, when a lot of the Pakistanis immigrated to the Western world, they brought this normality with them, expecting that their children who were born here, raised here, would just pick up the culture and move forward. Unfortunately, for a lot of the older generation, they do not foresee this clash of civilizations, if you like. We now move on to the story of Rukshana Nars, who in March 1998, her life was taken by her two brothers and her mother. Now, you have to understand the north of England. Most of the Pakistanis that first left Pakistan, when they went to Britain, they all went to the north of England. Very much a community vibe, but because a lot of them all went to similar cities like Derby, Sheffield, Nottingham, Manchester, again, all in the north of England, like my family, when they first went to England, they were in Sheffield, they all kind of knew each other. For example, when the British went to Kashmir and said, look, come to England and help us rebuild our country, most of the Kashmiris that went, like my family, knew everyone else that was going. This is obviously great if you're going to a new country, but in this specific context of social pressure, social perception, it can also have a negative impact. For example, if your daughter is doing something, if she's having an affair, for example, in this context, right? Well, everyone that you know is going to find out, and that's going to bring shame on your family. So for them, or in this case, in this story, being in the north of England, a Western country, is literally the same as being back home. Because again, everyone knows each other. There's more to this story that I'm coming onto, but I think it's important to understand the community aspect of the north of England for you to understand why public perception means so much. Now, Rukhsana, when she was young, when she was in school, she had a long-standing friendship with a guy called Imran Najid. Rukhsana and Imran were both 19 years old, but both of their families were opposed to the relationship. See, having a boyfriend or a girlfriend in the Pakistani culture is frowned upon. As Muslims in Islam, the relationship between man and women only becomes intimate during marriage. So there's no concept of boyfriend or girlfriend. You can have male or female acquaintances, even though that's frowned upon in some quarters. But given the nature of Imran and Rukhsana's relationship, the families didn't like it, because they were boyfriend and girlfriend. Now, it was reported that on a holiday in spring 1994 in Pakistan, Rukhsana had met and liked a second cousin. He was called Sajid Nawaz, with whom a marriage was then arranged. Now, this is what was reported, and I have issue with this report. It says that Rukhsana was interested in this second cousin. Well, if you look at the situation further, Rukhsana got married to him, then she came back to England. There's no real information on how she knew him. Did they speak to each other before she went to Pakistan? See, what a lot of you don't know, and this happened a lot in the 90s with the British Pakistanis. I know because a lot of members in my family were victims of this, so to speak. The parents would take their children to Pakistan, and these would be, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, right? And a lot of the times, they wouldn't tell them, hey, you're marrying X person. I don't know what the word is. I don't know what the legal term for this is, but essentially it is a forced marriage by guilt. So to give an example, right? My parents would say, hey, Cameron, we're going to go on a family trip to Pakistan. I'd be like, okay, cool, no problem. We would go. And then at some point, my mom or my father would tell me, hey, you're marrying this person. Now, that's never happened to me because my parents would never do that to me, right? But that's just an example of how it would work. And in that moment where I am there, I look at my family there, they're all poor, they're all living in poverty, right? I look at my mom's face, I look at my father's face, I look at the girl in question, and in a way, my parents kind of would hope that my guilt would, you know, make me say yes. But I think that's what happened with Rukshana, because it was said that this Sajid husband of hers actually never ended up in England. So she went there, got married, and just came home. And I think the reason why she did it is she was probably told, if you don't get married to him, you ain't going back to England. And yes, I know it's crazy, it's fucked up. There are no words in the English language to describe how messed up that situation is, but that was the reality. Now, Sajid and Rukhsana's first child was born after her return to England. A second child was born following a second visit to see Sajid in Pakistan in 1996. So, as I confirmed, Sajid actually never ever made it to England. It's also important to note that in 1997, Imran, this, I guess you could say, high school sweetheart of Rukhsana, he actually got married. But in late 97, Rukshana, she gets pregnant by Imran. And this is where the story starts to unravel. Just to reiterate, Rukshana is married to Sajid, who is in Pakistan. Imran, at this point, had married someone else, but they both remain childhood sweethearts. You could ask, well, why didn't they just get married? And it's because their relationship was formed through illegitimate means, right? Her parents never liked him in the first place, and his parents never liked her in the first place, purely because they, engaged in forbidden means. They were never going to let them get married. So on the 26th of March in 1998, she was 28 weeks pregnant. About a month previously, she had bought a house on 140 Clarence Road, which she had moved in with her sister Safina and Safina's husband, and she was planning to give birth to Imran's child and live with Imran. Now, on that same day, which was a Thursday, the family would always meet at the mother's house. Now, the mother's name is Shakila. She lived on 80 Clarence Road, so essentially, they all lived on the same street. So around 6:30 p.m., all the family was present on this same day, including Rukhsana's two children, but not Rukshana, who had telephoned to say that she was not feeling well. Now, according to Rukhsana's sister Safina, she said that their mother Shakila was the reason why Rukshana didn't come to the house that day, as they had family around and they had friends around and they were having like a early dinner. The mother didn't want this wider family to see that Rukshana was pregnant. So now we come on to the two brothers. One was called Iftikhar, one was called Shahzad. At this point, Iftikhar did not know that Rukshana was pregnant, and his mother Shakila did not want him to find out. So at this dinner party that they're having, Shakila says, I need to go see someone at the hospital. She then leaves around 7 p.m., 7:30 p.m. She takes Iftikhar and Shahzad with her. It turns out that Shakila and her two sons, they actually went to Rukshana's house where her life was taken. The two sons then took Rukshana's body in a big bag that they had. They put her in the car. They took her to a field some 70 miles away from Derby. Then around 10:30 p.m. that night, Safina and her husband returned to 140 Clarence Road, where she was living with Rukshana, and they could see that she wasn't there. Now, what's interesting here is that Safina got worried straight away and she wanted to tell the police. So you got to ask yourself, if you return home and your sister or your mother isn't there, at first you're not gonna think, did something happen? Are they okay? You're gonna think, well, maybe they're upstairs, or maybe they went out for a walk, or I don't know, maybe they're at a friend's place. You know what I'm trying to say, right? But with Safina, she called her mum straight away, and her mum said, "Don't worry, Rukshana is okay." But this kind of made Safina worried, and I think, given Safina's reaction, she obviously knew of the pregnancy, but she also knew what her family was capable of. When she called her mother went on to say, "Don't worry, go to sleep. Rukshana might come back in the morning." Now, Safina, the next day, she did report Rukshana missing to the police, but then she retracted this report because her brother Iftikhar said to her, this would bring shame on the family. Rukshana's body was only found by a farmer on the 31st of March 1998, after which extensive police investigations began. As soon as this happened, Shahzad, he leaves the country and he goes abroad. And this is another nuance I need to explain. So with the Pakistani community or with the Pakistani culture, when a lot of the individuals get into some kind of legal problems, right, or if they're going to go to jail, or if they get caught by police, they're facing jail time, a lot of them will run to Pakistan for 6 months to a year, hoping that the case or whatever the situation is blows over, so then when they return, everything's okay. Back in the 90s, this was fine. Now, it wouldn't work because, the internet and technology and the police have a record of everything. The moment you land back in England, immigrations have got you and you're done, right? But back in the 90s, this was very common. On the 3rd of April 1998, the police took a witness statement from Iftikhar and Shakila. On the 4th of April 98, Iftikhar said that threats had been made by Imran's father and gave details of an alibi with his girlfriend, Miss Wan. So what Iftikhar was trying to tell the police was, firstly, Imran, who is the father or was the father to Rukshana's child-to-be, I guess, he started to threaten Iftikhar. But Iftikhar at the time was at his girlfriend's house. Now his girlfriend did tell the police, yes, he was with me. She initially gave an alibi, but then at some point she withdrew the alibi and said, look, he wasn't with me, don't get me involved. So upon Louise Wan, Iftikhar's girlfriend, retracting her alibi, Iftikhar then told the police, yes, I've been lying to you, let me tell you the truth. He went on to say that his family, his brother Shahzad and one of their uncles on the road bought spades prior to the death of his sister, as they had planned this death for a while. So Iftikhar told the police that when they arrived at Rukshana's house, his brother Shahzad parked the car on like a side road, which he found kind of weird. His mother Shakila, she asked Rukshana, are you going to have an abortion? To which Rukshana said, no, I'm keeping the baby. Then Iftikhar, he went upstairs to the toilet. He heard arguments and Rukshana telling the others to leave. And when he came downstairs, he had seen Rukshana's face down and not breathing. His brother Shahzad had like a rope around his hands. And his mother Shakila, she was holding Rukshana's leg and Rukshana was not responding at all. At this moment, Iftikhar realized Rukshana's dead. His mother comes up to him and his mother says, don't worry, it will be okay, and this had to be done. And judging by this part of the police interview, it seems that Iftikhar didn't know that any of this would happen. This was the case when police eventually interviewed Shahzad, who was back in the country in the month of June 1998. Shahzad said that I didn't know, Iftikhar did it. Iftikhar said, I don't know, Shahzad did it and my mother did it. The mother said, I don't know, the brothers did it. So essentially they all turned on each other. So Shahzad and the mother Shakila were sentenced to life in prison on the 25th of May 1999. Iftikhar, however, was acquitted. And why did both of these events take place? Purely based on what other people may think of you. That's what honor killings are. Honor killings happen because you can't face public backlash, so to speak. You're more worried about what other people think of you than the happiness of your family members. I do think with the generation now growing up in Britain and in America, you're going to see a lot less of this because it's just normal that when you immigrate to a different country, you take on some of the customs, right? Then your children take on most of the customs of whichever country you're in. And then their children take more and so on and so forth, to the point where the original culture where your, grandfather or whoever came from, well, it's pretty much lost. Like my father is far more Pakistani than I will ever be in terms of his nuances, the way he walks, the way he talks, some of the things he likes, some of the things he says, what makes him happy, what makes him sad, right? He was born in Pakistan, so that would be normal. My son, however, will probably be less Pakistani than me because he was born here in America. His environment is completely different to mine. So I do believe as the generations go on, you'll hear less and less honor killings. Most of these honor killings that take place happen from first generation subcontinent Asians who came to the Western world in the 80s and the 90s. and found the transition period rather difficult. So why don't you guys comment, tell me what you think.